We've gotten some questions on how to integrate an OpenAI assistant into Zoho Cliq. Let's talk about it on today's Azaz. Welcome back, Zen heads, to Ask Zenatta Anything About Zoho. It's pretty crazy to think that it's been over a year since I first posted my version of a ChatGPT Cliq Bot. Needless to say, OpenAI has introduced a lot of new features in the last year, one of the biggest being the introduction of assistants. This prompted Jean-Eric, one of our viewers, to ask, I'd love to see an updated video on how to incorporate a tailored GPT assistant with a Cliq Bot. Well, we're here to do just that. First, let's talk about what an assistant is. An assistant is an instance of an OpenAI model that is configured with specific background instructions to tune its personality and capabilities. It's similar to creating a custom GPT from the ChatGPT web interface, except those custom GPTs are not accessible via API, only through the official ChatGPT interface. So our assistants are going to be accessible via Zoho Cliq. To start, we need to create our assistant on the OpenAI platform. To do that, we're going to go to platform.openai.com, make sure you're logged in, and then we're going to go over to the Assistants tab. It's over here on the left, noted by this little robot-looking guy. Click on that, and I already have an assistant created. If you were to make a brand new one, you would click on Create up here. But I'll just go ahead and click on this Azaz Cliq Bot that I've already made. And here you can see that I have an assistant ID that gets created. Then I need to give my bot a user-friendly name. In this case, I called him Azaz Cliq Bot. And then the big part is creating the instructions. The key here is giving your assistant the right kind of instructions. The more detailed your instructions are, then the more refined your assistant responses will be. Here, I've told the assistant to focus on answering Zoho questions using primarily Zenatta.com and the Zoho Help Desk for its primary sources of information. I've also asked it not to provide links unless it knows there's relevant content on the page. I've also included markdown rules specific to Zoho Cliq so that it can help format the answers in a nice readable way when it shows up in our Cliq chat window. You can also select the model here. The latest that they have is GPT-4o, which I would recommend over GPT-4 Turbo. GPT-4o is a little bit faster and a lot cheaper in its credit usage than the GPT-4 Turbo. You can also have tools here for file search if you wanted to upload specific files that you would like the bot to reference. For example, if you have a YouTube channel that you want the bot to be able to reference those videos, you could include a large text file with a list of your videos and their URLs and descriptions so that it has a faster way to reference rather than having to try to go look via web search, which it's still not the best at. So any information you can give to your assistant up front, the questions are going to be answered that much faster and that much more correctly and succinctly. You can also turn on the ability for your assistant to interpret code, as well as actually writing and running code to be able to include additional functions that you might want your specific assistant to relate. We won't go into these for today. It's a little bit outside of our scope for this particular bot. Today, I'm just going to be showing you how to, based off of creating a tailored bot with these instructions, how you can start getting those responses. Because it's a little bit different to the GPT bot that we created over a year ago. Once my bot has been created, I am going to want to copy this assistant ID for use in my Deluge code in my Zoho Cliq Bot later. So now let's get to creating that Cliq Bot. So now we're in Zoho Cliq. To create a bot, you're going to click on your profile picture inside of Zoho Cliq and then select Bots and Tools. Here you can create a new bot. I already have my Azaz bot existing here, but I'll show you what the Create Bot page looks like, where you define the name of your bot, give it a description. You can determine the access level of the bot, if this is just for you, if it might be for an entire team or your entire organization. You can also change the little icon for the bot, make it tailored to whatever the bot's purpose is, make it easier to see on a list of chat messages. Once you've created your bot, then you're going to want to go to this Edit Handlers. And you have a lot of different handlers for your Cliq Bot. The welcome handler when somebody first subscribes, the message handler when someone sends it a message, anytime the bot is mentioned anywhere else, context handler, which is It sort of listens for responses from your users for a brief window of time, incoming webhooks, and participation in chats and message channels. We only have to worry about the message handler here. This is, again, where a user will ask a question of your bot. That will trigger this Deluge, this message handler, to prompt it to send the query to OpenAI and then trigger the response listening, which we'll get to in a moment. So I'll go ahead and click on Edit Code. And I've already got the code all written in here, so I will take you through how it's built. The basic flow of our message handler is we're going to get the most recent chat messages so that the bot has a little bit more context. That way, if you ask a follow-up question, it will already have the information of the previous messages rather than only going off of what the last message received was. So we'll get those most recent chat messages. Then we have to compile those into a list to create a thread for the assistant to read. An assistant can have access to threads. Threads are collections of messages. So we're going to create one of those threads and then implement it in what's called a run. So a run is an instance of telling the bot, here's all of these messages. I would like you to create a response that fits within the context of this same thread. So first, we are going to get the chat history to make sure that we're not grabbing too much stuff, because eventually you can give it too much information. I have a message limit here of 10 so that it only looks at whatever the last 10 messages are. Anywhere back beyond that, it's probably referring to a different conversation. But you can always adjust this if you want. This chat history is just pulled straight from the Cliq API documentation. One important thing is that you do need a connection here. I've called it Cliq user. The connection should not be made through the Zoho OAuth connections, but actually through the Zoho Cliq integration. This is because we have to have the connection using the credentials of whoever is currently logged in, because there are security measures in Zoho Cliq's APIs so that a boss can't read the private messages between two employees. You only have access to the messages that you, as a logged in user, should have access to. So with that connection, whoever is asking the bot a question, the bot will run using that user's credentials. So once we get the chat messages, we're going to sort through that list. It comes in a list called data inside of that response variable. So for each one of those chat messages, if the chat message sender starts with a B, that means that it's one of the messages from the bot or the OpenAI assistant. So we're going to set the role as assistant. Otherwise, it's a message from a user, so it'll have the role of user. Then something that we've noticed in the past is that OpenAI sometimes has trouble with line breaks. So we have the chat messages. We are replacing any \n's or \t's, so line breaks or tabs, with just an empty space. Makes it easier for the OpenAI to parse that response. And then we're going to add that chat message to a growing list with the given role and content. So again, all of these messages are either from the assistant or they're from the user, and then we have the actual text of each message. Then we're going to put that inside of a map attached to a key called messages, which this is going to make up our thread that will feed into the OpenAI API call. Then here I have my OpenAI API. Now this is the key that you have to use to have permission for your Cliq Bot to be able to talk to OpenAI, to OpenAI's API. That's never going to get easy to say. To generate an API key, you go back to your platform.openai page, and over here you have API keys. Now, if you haven't created an API key in a while, or you made one a year ago, they have recently updated from user API keys to project API keys. So this is where you will generate your API keys based on your specific bot. I actually created a project called Azaz Bot and made an API key for it. You'll create your secret key here, have permissions assigned, whether it should be able to read and write, or just write. Now, keep in mind that your secret key will only be visible when you first create it. After it's been created, it is locked down. You can't take a look at it anymore. If you have to generate a new one, or that is to say, if you lose your API key, you will have to generate a new one here at this page and replace it in your Deluge code. So I already have my API key in place. We'll come back here to the Deluge code. I also now can copy the assistant ID, which here I'm calling assistant key. This is the ID of the particular assistant that I'm calling. That way, when I'm creating my thread and run, it knows which assistant to use. So now we have some maps to make for making our initial API call to OpenAI. For that, we are going to put in an authorization header where we'll have the word bearer, a space, and then our OpenAI API key. We'll set the content type as application/JSON. And for the assistants, because they are still in beta, at least as of recording this video, you have to include this OpenAI-beta header with the value assistants equals v2, or v1 if you're using the v1 of the assistants, but we'll use the latest here. So those are the headers. Now we have to put in the body, or the parameters. And those are going to be our thread with our messages and the list of those messages. And then another parameter of our assistant_ID, which is this value that we copied from the assistant page in OpenAI. With all of these things in place, we can now create our run. Now you can create a thread and then create a run with that thread, but fortunately they allow you to do kind of one and the same in one API call. So we'll be doing that. We're going to create a run and a thread at the same time. So we hit this endpoint of api.openai.com/v1/threads/runs. It's going to be a post. We're going to put in these run params, which that was the thread and assistant ID. We're going to change them to a string because that's how we pass in application/JSON content types. And then we'll pass in those OpenAI headers. Now, this create run, you might think that the response for this will contain the completion from OpenAI. That's not the case with assistants. It was the case with getting chat completions, such as in the bot that I coded a year ago. But for this one, it's asynchronous, which means that rather than us getting a response back of the finished answer, because it can take some time to formulate an answer, creating a run is like telling it to start a job. And then OpenAI is going to be working on that job in the background. It's up to us to check back with OpenAI and find out when it has finished formulating that response. So we're going to actually have to use Zoho Flow. But first, I'll get my thread ID that's created in this same run. I have here just a little error handling that if the thread ID is null, meaning that something went wrong, then I want to see the response from that OpenAI call. I also get the ID of the particular run that was just created, and now I'm going to post this to Zoho Flow. So this post to Zoho Flow, come over here, is a flow with an open webhook where I'm going to be posting to that flow the parameters of the thread ID and the current logged in user in Cliq so that I can know what thread I should be looking at and who I should be sending the message to. So I have this webhook, and then I have a delay in here of waiting half a second to give OpenAI a little bit of time to formulate its answer. If I don't have this here, this process that I'm going to explain will still work. You may find yourself using more flow credits than you have to, and depending on how often you're talking to OpenAI, you could run out of Zoho Flow credits pretty quickly. So I would recommend having a delay in here of half a second, maybe even 1 second or 1.5 seconds. So that way you're only querying OpenAI as often as you need to. Then after this half-second delay, we run a function to check for any new messages. So I'll open this up in another tab here. So this check for OpenAI messages has one input argument of the thread ID. Then I have all the same authorization information that I had in my previous code of my OpenAI API key, as well as the assistant ID. And I create my same headers map of authorization with the bearer token, the content type is application/JSON, and again, the OpenAI beta is assistants equals v2. And now I'm going to get the thread messages. So again, we created a run on a thread. And now we're going to query that thread to check what are the latest messages on that thread? And is there a new message from our assistant? So then in here, I have an if statement. It's a pretty simple one. It checks if, based on the JSON data that comes back for the thread messages, things get nested pretty deep down. So what I do is I check inside of data, get 0, which means get the first entry, and get the role of that first entry. So if that first message, which is the latest message, has the role of assistant, that means we've got our response from the assistant. But I also have one more check in here, and that's that sometimes that message object gets created before the answer has necessarily been populated. So I also check that my get thread messages content, which is a list inside of that message object, that content shouldn't be empty. And inside of that content list is where we'll actually get our response. And that is done here. So I have my get thread messages. So if both of these criteria are met, then what I'm going to return out of this function, which it's asking for a string. Well, I mean, I defined it to ask for a string. We're going to return get thread messages dot get data, dot get 0, dot get content, dot get 0, dot get text, dot get value. And so that whole path is what will give us the actual response from our OpenAI assistant. So then what I have here is that if these two conditions are not met, meaning that I got the list of messages and the latest message either is empty or it's from the user, then it means that the bot has not responded yet. So I'm just going to return the thread ID, which starts with thread underscore, back to as the output for this function. And so now if we go back into the Zoho flow, the actual builder to show what happens, then I have a decision box here where I find out, is the response still in progress or has it been completed? So this is a simple condition that checks if the response starts with thread underscore, it means that I've passed back the thread ID. And since I passed back the thread ID, that means that we don't have our latest message yet. So I want to go down this path, and I have a function here called postFlow webhook. And inside of this function, I'm very simply I'm making an invoke URL post back to the original webhook of this flow with the same information that it had before of the thread ID and the logged in user ID. This way, if my response hasn't come in yet, I re-trigger this same flow so it can wait another half a second and then check for the messages once again. So it'll keep looping like that until it gets an answer. And once it has that answer, it will go down this default path and run this message to bot action, where in here I have defined that the message that is being sent should be the result of the check for OpenAI message function that I'm running. And then for the user that should be messaged, I'm using a custom value, and that's coming from the webhook trigger payload using the user ID that was originally passed in. And then I'm posting it to, in this case, the Azaz bot, and it doesn't need to be a broadcast message. So this way, our function inside of our bot is triggering this flow to then loop and keep looping until it gets an answer, at which point it will send a message back to our original user. So I'll head back here into the code, and you'll notice that on the bottom of my code here, I have it that after it posts that flow webhook, I'm just going to return a text value of checking ... This way, I can see that my function ran all the way through, and now to indicate to my user that we're waiting for Zoho Flow to finish its job. So now with all these pieces in place, I can now message my bot. So for example, over here, I've got my Azaz bot, and I'm going to ask it a question of how do I view a Gantt in Zoho project? And I will press enter. I get my response back of checking, which means that we got past this post to flow trigger. So my Zoho Flow is running in the background, checking those responses over and over again. And voila, we have ourselves a response. And so in here, I've got a nice big long response showing to log into Zoho project, select relevant project, navigate to the Gantt chart in the project interface, see the navigation menu on the left side, click on Gantt chart from the menu options, could be under reports or a similar section depending on your Zoho projects. And it provides some additional materials on advanced viewing. Now here it is trying to do some resource links. And this is an important thing to note, that the OpenAI assistants are going to do their best, but they might not always be factually correct. Always something to keep in mind. So in the case of this resource link, it's showing me a way that I could see some additional instructions. And so I've got a link here for Zoho Projects Gantt chart, which sounds great. And I will click on it, and we have projects, tasks, and Gantt view. It says that no article was found. So this was an instance where my Zoho assistant took a guess as to what the hyperlink path would be for a article about the Gantt chart view in task. It was probably pretty close, because if I just get rid of Gantt view and just look at projects/tasks, then yes, projects tasks is in fact a valid page inside of the Zoho knowledge base, but unfortunately there isn't one specifically for Gantt view. So this is where you would probably want to either tell your bot not to share links at all, because you can't always verify that there will be something correct on the other end, or you would need to include a file in your assistant's settings that actually has an index of web pages, their URLs, and tags describing their content. But there you go. You might have some questions of, why do we have to use Zoho Flow? Could I just set up a for each loop with 10, 20, or 30 attempts and then keep querying the OpenAPI endpoint? Well, there's two reasons that we went the direction of using Zoho Flow for that kind of asynchronous piece of it. One reason is that you can certainly set up a just loop of attempts, and I did set one of those up. I had to set it up so that it would run upwards of 100 or 200 times to make sure that it would always get the response before it would simply run out of attempt. And while that did work, I didn't like it for two reasons. One was that hits the OpenAI API a lot of times, many times in a small span of time. And you could find yourself hitting rate limits with the OpenAI API. That could cause, depends if you have multiple users asking the bot questions at the same time, then you could run into getting locked out because you've hit an API rate limit. You've queried it too many times too quickly. The other thing that I noticed was that when I asked more open-ended questions that warranted larger and longer responses, just inside of just running the Cliq Bot code here, sometimes the response simply wouldn't populate. So any of those longer responses I just found were more reliably posted by using the Zoho Flow post message to bot action block rather than trying to return the response directly within the code here. So that is how you create a connection between a Zoho Cliq Bot and an OpenAI assistant. I would love to know from you guys if there are any additional applications you think that this could be used for. Maybe some assistants outside of Zoho Cliq. Where would you most like to see AI being leveraged? And if any of you take this on and manage to figure out some slicker solutions, please, I would love to know. I love this open community and how much you guys get involved with it. So if you have a chance, head over to club.zenatta.com. You can join our online forum there where we have code shares, because I would love to see your guys' builds of these Cliq Bots and OpenAI assistants. So if you like this video, please give us a like and subscribe, share, comment, blah, 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 all that stuff. We'll see you next time on Azaz. Hit us up with any questions you've got, and head over to zenatta.com. Click on Book a Meeting if you would like to meet with any of our staff members. Thank you very much, guys. We will see you in the next Azaz.